Hello, and welcome to What If Deku Was Yuta's Reincarnation, the movie. We would start this story with Deku bragging to his friends about how he was going to visit the quirk doctors the next day, and he was going to finally find out what his quirk was. Deku and his friends would all be excited as seeing their closest friend unlock a power that was so exciting to them. Eventually, the next day would arrive. Deku would be at the Quirk's doctor's. That's when he would be diagnosed with a copy quirk. The doctor explaining that as long as Deku has consumed a part of a quirked person's body, he could permanently use their quirk, but it kind of worked like a muscle. So, if he copied somebody's quirk, Deku would have to exercise their quirk to be able to use it for longer. Deku's base time with a quirk would be like 5 minutes, but that will be increasing the more Deku trains with that specific quirk. He still has it for like ever, but he can only access it in like that duration of time before it goes like on cooldown. Deku getting back from the quirk doctors would be really excited as he didn't just get a single quirk. He had the potential to get all of the different types of quirk there were. He would ask his mom for a piece of her hair, and Inko would oblige, giving up a piece of her hair. This would mark Deku's first quirk copied. Deku would spend the rest of the evening practicing with Inko's quirk, trying to figure out how it works. It wasn't really that strong. Inko didn't really train it in her youth, but Deku, he would train it. Deku would return to school the next day. Everybody was excited they as Deku had the potential to have a very powerful quirk to their knowledge. Before Deku could reveal that he did have a copy quirk, a friend of Deku's by the name of Rika would run up to Deku, saying if Deku, just in case he didn't have a quirk, she would still be his friend. Deku would tell Rika that he did have a quirk, but he was gonna show it off a little bit. That's when little crackles and sizzles could be heard across the room. Everybody would look towards Bakugo. He just awakened his quirk. Explosions. Everybody instantly would hype up Bakugo, as this was the coolest thing ever. Deku would approach Bakugo and tell him that it would be amazing that he also unlocked his quirk. Bakugo would ask Deku what his quirk was, but Deku would reply by showing his hands up in the air. Suddenly, Bakugo would feel a little prick on his head as a piece of hair got pulled out. So Bakugo would say, "Oh, you got telekinesis like your mom? That's pretty lame." But to Bakugo's shock, Deku would eat the hair. And that's when Deku would create small explosions too. Instantly, the entire room would look at Deku. They realized Deku had a copy quirk, and that was so cool. Deku wasn't limited to just one special ability. All the attention went from Bakugo to Deku, as Deku had a super strong quirk. Bakugo, feeling jealous that nobody was paying attention to him anymore, would say that Deku's quirk was completely useless without strong people like him. The entire room would acknowledge that, and most of the people would go back to Baku's favor. But a small percent of the class still thought Deku was the GOAT with his coffee quirk, including Rika. Later, the, later that day, Deku would be at the playground with his best friend Rika. Deku would question how cool of a quirk that Rika might have one day, and it'll be really cool. Rika would look a little bit sad, explaining that both of her parents were quirkless, but her grandparents had quirks, so Deku would be a little bummed out, but reassuring her, even if she didn't have a quirk, he would still be her best friend. As soon as those words left his mouth, a truck would come out of nowhere, running over Rika. Truckun has came back for another victim. Deku would look on in utter horror as he would utter Rika, looking at Rika's corpse that just has been flung across the entire playground. Little did Deku or Rika know, Rika actually did have a quirk. It was a cursed quirk that allows her, after death, to leech onto somebody and curse them. And unfortunately for Deku, Rika would curse him with her cursed spirit. Rika would transform into a cursed spirit with insane strength, but little did Deku know that Rika was going to be attached to him. But he would find out that a little bit later. Then a bystander would call 911 as they just saw a truck run over a little girl. Rika would be transferred to a hospital, but we already know it was too late for her. Deku returned to his house, being so saddened that one of his friends just died unexpectedly. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, Deku would be really sad and in the downs. That's when Deku would hear a creepy utter voice saying, "Don't be sad, Deku." Instantly, Deku would freeze as he saw this horrifying creature that was trying to comfort him for some reason. Deku would order to stay back and not to hurt him, but Rika would only reply that she would never hurt Deku and that she loved Deku. This is when Deku would realize this this was something familiar. Deku would ask what it was, and Rika would reply with its name, saying that she was Rika and she came back to help Deku out. Deku hearing this would be a little relieved that he still had his friend Rika, but in this state he did feel sorrowful that Rika was still binded to him and she couldn't enjoy the afterlife quite yet. The years would go by. Eventually, they would be in the eighth grade. During this duration of time, Deku managed to copy a quirk that was akin to something of cursed speech. This would be one of Deku's favorite quirks to use, as he constantly would use it, increasing the duration of time that he could use it for. At this point, Deku would have three quirks he had copied. He would have the cursed speech quirk, Baku's explosions, and his mom's telekinesis quirk. And you'd have Rika, who is invisible to the other people and possessed immense strength. And Rika would help Deku out. Deku would be able to control Rika through his verbal commands. It would be the last day of the eighth grade for Deku. Deku would be sitting in the back as the teacher would utter the words of, "What's the future career? Who wants to do what?" That's when Deku would respond that he was going to be a pro hero. And he was going to the UA High. Baku from the background would say that if anybody, he had a better chance. Bakugo would still be a little bit of a bully towards Deku in this timeline because he felt inferior because Deku had such a powerful quirk. But Deku would defend himself. So like, he wasn't as bullied. Eventually, the class would be over, and Baku would make his way over, trying to steal his Deku's notebook. Deku would utter a command of "Don't." Bakugo's Goonies and Bakugo himself, they would all be paralyzed for a brief moment as Deku would walk off with his notebook in hand. Deku would be on his way back to his house when suddenly a sludge villain would appear, instantly swarming Deku, for forcing himself down his throat, trying to choke out Deku. Deku unknowingly would copy the sludge villain's quirk, but at the same time, Rika, seeing that someone was throwing her Deku, she would instantly go into outrage, managing to tear the sludge villain apart and free Deku. The sludge villain would be in questioning as he just got ripped off of his host by an invisible force. But luckily for him, the sludge villain didn't have a solid body, so with all of Rika's strength, Rika couldn't really kill the sludge villain, just relying on brute force. Rika would continue tearing at the sludge villain, and the sludge villain would be unable to reform into his proper shape. That's when All Might would appear out from the sewers, questioning the young boy of if he did just use his quirk to defeat the sludge villain. Deku would admit that it was his quirk, just putting it in simple terms, as it would be kind of hard to explain to Rika. So All Might would thank the young boy for his service and his help, and he would be on his way. That's when Deku would ask for All Might's autograph, and All Might would tell him to check in his notebook. To Deku's surprise, his notebook was already signed. Deku would make his way back as he would start training for the entrance exams for UA High. This would be in the following 10 months. He would go to Daoma Beach. There he would train his quirks and his physical stats, not just wanting to rely on his quirk, thinking if he found himself unable to use his quirk or Rika, that he needed some proper defense. During the duration of the time, he would pick up the sword, learning how to do hand-to-hand combat and the sword play, finding it easier to learn with the sword. Deku's copied quirk would drastically increase their duration that Deku could use them. He would be able to freely use Bakugo's quirk for at least 30 minutes straight. And Deku would continue learning the Sludge Villain's quirk. Finding it out, he would use its power like a Logia from One Piece, like a Logia fruit, making attacks like freeze through him. Deku would ask Rika if there is any way that she could further strengthen herself. Rika would reply that she had no idea, and she thought that her power was already to its maximum capability, and she would add in that she had been holding back. Deku would ask Rika to stop holding back, and Rika would attack the trash at the Daoma beach. To Deku's surprise, the trash would be completely decimated, being teared past shreds into microscopics. Deku would be surprised that he didn't know Rika was that powerful. He would continue training with his swordsmanship, managing to be able to cut through some trash. And oh yeah, for his mom's quirk that Deku copied, it would be much stronger than Inko's version since he properly trained it. He would be able to move objects 15 meters away, and the heaviest that he could lift something was, let's say 250 pounds. That was the max limits of Deku's telekinesis. Eventually, the 10 months of training would be over for Deku, and he would find himself at the front of UA. Deku would enter the building this time, not having a little fumble of hesitation. He would proceed with the first section of the exam. This would be an intellectual part of the exam. Deku had that under wraps, as he was a pretty smart kid, easily passing that part of it. Then the next part would occur, the robot section. In this part, Deku would needed to defeat robots and earn their points. This would be explained by President Mike. Sorry if I butchered his name, guys. He would explain that the various robots were worth different points. That then he would be interrupted by Ida, a blue-haired kid, saying that he was missing a robot, as the papers they were given had four robots listed. President Pres Mike would dismay Ida's statement, explaining that the final robot was worth 0 points and it was much more difficult to defeat. Deku would proceed to find himself in the front of the line. Realized he would think to himself that in a real hero battle there was no waiting, so he would take a risk and hop over the fence. Everybody would start complaining about how Deku was cheating, and that wasn't really part of the rules. But President Mike would confirm that it was completely in the rules, and Deku was in the right. There was no waiting in a real hero situation. Deku would rush forward towards a small groups of two-pointers. He would blast off with Bakugo's explosion quirks, easily blowing up the robots' head faces off in a very similar style to Bakugo since aggressiveness. He would proceed blasting off many robots, scratching up his points, as he would tell Rika to deal with some assist since nobody could really see Rika. He still wanted it to make sure that the instructors knew that he was the one taking down these robots. So Deku and Rika would easily manage to take down 15 robots in the span of the first 8 minutes of the exam. Wait, actually make that 30 robots in the first 8 minutes of the exam. Yeah, Deku's gonna have some crack points. They would proceed doing this tag teaming, easily taking down the various different levels of robots. And eventually, as the exam would come to a close, well, basically, Deku would see that the 0 pointer was out, and there was a girl trapped underneath the rubble. Deku would instantly rush towards the 0 pointer, thinking this was a good time to test out Rika's limits. Rika would go forward, instantly managing to take out the 0 pointer's leg, where Deku would be focused on trying to help the girl escape. They Deku would manage to release the girl, which would be Uraraka. Rika would be continuing decimating the 0 pointer. As Rika would absolutely destroy it. The proctors would be very impressed with Deku's capabilities, as Deku would easily score #1, surpassing even All Might's records. But he would only find out that later. Back at his house, Deku would be waiting for the ticket, or the letter from UA. Deku would be pretty confident that he wouldn't be able to get into UA. And when the letter finally arrived, it would only would support Deku's confidence. Deku would make his way towards UA as it was the first day of UA. When Deku walked in front of the door, he would see Bakugo and Ida bickering, since Bakugo was putting up his legs on the UA's tables. Ida would find this offensive as how dare this delinquent disrespect the proper formal of UA. Then Uraraka would approach Deku, thanking him for the save. That's when they would all hear that everybody should be quiet. This was from a beanbag person that was inside a beanbag. He would say that he was their teacher and they needed to meet him out in the outside as they had a quirk test to do. On their way out to the test, Deku would continue chatting up with Uraraka. Deku would find out that Uraraka had a zero gravity quirk. Deku would instantly use his telekinesis to pluck out of one of Uraraka's hairs. Finding this quirk was going to be very useful. He would eat it very sneakily. They would arrive at the quirk test zone. Aizawa, the teacher, would hand over Deku a ball, saying that he was going to go first, as he was the number one point. Yeah, he was the number one person in the exam. Deku would use Uraraka's zero gravity quirk on the ball, simply tossing it out, and he would score an infinity score. Everybody would be shocked as Deku. They thought Deku had the raw physical strength to toss the ball straight into outer space. Uraraka, seeing this, would come to the conclusion that Deku had a copy quirk and just copied her quirk. Bakugo would be pissed off as he was not the too happy to see that Deku got an infinity score. As Deku's hype would die down, not Mineta, the pink person girl would proclaim that this was going to be such a fun thing to do since like they would be able to use their quirks freely. That's when Aizawa would stare dead on at the entire class, saying that this wasn't going to be a fun thing and saying whoever got last place was game expelled. The entire mood would drop as everybody would look dead at the pink girl. The next exam would be like a speed exam. Deku wouldn't need to copy Ida's quirk, as he was already pretty quick since, like, if you saw Yuta running in the last season of JJK, he was like, pretty quick. So Deku would easily manage to get third place on that exam. He would continue forward with the crushing, with the grip strength test, using Rika to help him out a little bit, not gonna lie. He would absolutely destroy it. Everybody would be in shock. The exams would eventually come to a close, and non surprisingly, Deku would score number one, followed by Momo, then Todoroki, and Bakura would be in fourth place. What? He would think to himself, being infuriated. We would carry forward to the hero versus villains whenever that took place. The teams would be drawn out, and it would be Deku and the tail guy, the guy with the tail quirk. Yeah, they would be on the hero team, and they would be versing Bakugo and Kirishima. As soon as the thing started, Bakugo would instantly tell Kirishima that he was gonna go out looking for Deku, as he needed his revenge. He needed to prove that he was superior than Deku. So Bakugo blasting his way down the various levels, eventually running into Deku. And Deku would challenge on Bakugo, telling Tail Guy that he needed to go up and find the bomb. Bakugo would blast forward towards Deku. Deku would instantly with sheath his sword, as he would be able to like actually use the sword thanks to support tech. So like, why not? Deku would flash over at Bakugo, managing to slash him cleanly through the chest. Bakugo being infuriated that Deku wasn't using any of his quirks whatsoever, would shout out that he better start using them, and he would need them to defeat him, Bakugo. Deku would find this amusing, as he would only decide that he was gonna rely on Bakugo's quirk, basically making it a funny thing. Like, hee hee ha ha, I'm gonna defeat you with your own quirk. Being mad disrespectful about it. That's when Deku would he would use Bakugo's own quirk, explosion himself towards him, managing to get multiple repeated clean hits on Bakugo. Eventually, Deku would use the advanced technique of the explosion quirk that even Bakugo hasn't managed to reach. It would be a super compressed explosion that had massive power, but that still would have a little drawback on Deku, riddling his bones a little bit. Bakugo would be shocked that Deku was this efficient at his own quirk. Like, what? They would proceed to scrap at it, eventually being matched, even battle. As Deku would overpower Bakugo, but Bakugo would outmaneuver Deku. Because, like, he would. Bakugo, growing tired of this, would use his grenades, charging up the explosion. Deku, seeing that this was like a major threat, he would use the sludge villain's quirk and turn himself into sludge, so he would be able to dodge that. Bakugo would think that he managed to blast away Deku, thinking that that was his victory. But Deku would sneak up behind Bakugo, uttering "Stay still," nah, uttering "sleep" with his her speech quirk. And Bakugo, here realizing this, would just like pass out, and Deku would tie up Bakugo with said rope. And Bakugo would be eliminated. Kirishima was the remaining person. Deku would make his way forward to the bomb, where he would find his teammate Ojiro. Was that the tail guy's name? Ojiro? Well, the tail guy would be in intense deadlock with Kirishima. Deku, seeing this, would simply freeze the both of them with his Courage Beast quirk and managing to touch the bomb. That would be the end of the hero versus villains. Moving on to the next thing would be the USJ. They would be arriving towards the USJ on a bus when the topic of who would be the strongest in the class would emerge from Froppy, if that was the girl name, you know. Oh yeah, Suyu. Yeah, Suyu Awesome. Yeah, that's the frog girls. People would be the class would be discussing this, thinking that Deku with his coffee quirk was easily the strongest, followed up by Todoroki, and maybe then Bakugo. Bakugo, hearing that he was the third fiddle, like, ain't no way, bruh. He would say that he would easily be able to defeat Deku if he stuck to one quirk. The class just being like, that wouldn't be very fair since yeah, Deku's quirk is like that. Versatile. Eventually, they would arrive at the USJ, where the black hole teacher would continue her rap session about how quirks were very dangerous. That's when a misty portal would emerge in the atmosphere, and the villains would arrive with the teleporter guy, Kurishimo. No, no, not that guy. That's like, yeah, but he would spread out the students. Deku would be unfortunately caught up in this because he wasn't on guard. He would be teleported to a water section with Suyu and Mineta. Right, yeah, that's definitely the purple hair guy's name. Deku would be in a disadvantage in the water, but still managing to beat off some of the villains that were in the water. That's when he would be pulled out by Suyu. Deku, Suyu, and Mineta would discuss a plan of how were they gonna get off of the boat and up to the mainland. Deku would instantly think of Rika could carry himself over there. Or maybe he could just use Rika to carry Suyu and Mineta as he would fly with Bakugo's explosion quirk. Explaining this to the two of them, calling Rika a copied quirk because hard to explain, or at least from Deku's point of view. And together they would Tsuyu and Mineta would seemingly float above the water as Deku would just be explosions himself over to the mainland. That's when they would see that Aizawa was facing off against the Nomu, as the mysterious villain by the name of Shigaraki would be laughing in utter amusement since the Nomu was absolutely wiping the floor with Aizawa. Deku, feeling that he needed to help Aizawa out, would rely on Rika, telling her that she would probably need to help out Aizawa with that Nomu creature. Rika would go out, facing off against the Nomu, managing to tear it to shreds. Well, like basically. The Nomu would, however, instantly recover from this and grow more durable. Rika, seeing this, would continue to shred it over and over again, managing to box up with the Nomu. That's when Aizawa would make his escape, as he was badly injured. He had managed to broke both of his arms and let's say three of his ribs, so he wasn't in too good of a situation. Deku, seeing the opportunity, would use his telekinesis to pluck out of one of Aizawa's hair, seeing that he knew Aizawa's with his erasure quirk. That would be pretty useful too. So Deku would gain Aizawa's erasure quirks. He would use it to erase the Nomu's quirk for a brief time, allowing Rika to tear to shreds with the Nomu's healing disable. Little Rika would manage to kill off the Nomu. Shigaraka, no, not Shigaraka, bro. It's Shigaraki. Seeing the Nomu was apparently defeated by a ghost would be infuriated as he decided to join the battlefield. Instantly rushing towards the group of the class, yeah, a small group of the class, being Mineta and Suyu, and let's say I don't think anybody else would be there. So rushing towards them, Deku would hop in, instantly using his cursed speech quirk, telling Shigaraki to blast away, as he would be sent flying away. The cursed speech quirk did have a little bit of a drawback, like hindering Deku's vocal cords for a little bit. But Deku, yeah, he would just recover just ever so slightly after his commands. That's when the heroes would arrive, as previously Ida managed to slip out of the USJ and call help from the heroes. Shigaraki would be shot down by the gunslinger hero, instantly instantly being teleported away back to his base. He would further complain about how a kid was a hindrance to him, and how the Nomu was defeated by something that he couldn't perceive. And we would move on to the sports festival, which would be like later that yeah, a couple of weeks later, I think maybe. And as the sports festival would begin, they would be at the race section as the race was about to begin. Deku feeling something was off, as he knew Todoroki was up to something. As Deku suspected, Todoroki would freeze the ground completely. Everybody was stuck, so he didn't manage to dodge the ice attack. Deku would simply make Rika like glide him across the ground, as he didn't really have a quirk to like get off over the ice. Well, yeah, he did have the explosions, but Deku would just glide around with Rika on the ice. Eventually, getting past the ice section, he would just be like super speedy. Because yeah, he's fast. Instantly outpacing Bakugo and Todoroki, managing to get in front of them. But they were close behind Deku. Deku managing to slip past the upcoming zero pointers, leaving the other two to deal with him. He would make his way, easily getting past, as a rope section would appear, and Deku would just blast over it with Bakugo's quirk. And Deku would think that everything was going in his favor, as he thought he could see the end in mind. That's when he would unknowingly step onto a mine, and he would be exploded into the air, and he would blast off towards the finish line. But suddenly, Bakugo and Todoroki would make their way over right next to Deku. This would be an intense three-way rushdown towards the finish line. Deku managing to ever so slightly blitz past the both of them, managing to get first place. And then it would be the cavalry battle. Deku would manage to get a very strong team, as people thought that Deku would easily be able to defend, as he did have a very powerful core. His team would be consisting of Waraka, Hatsume, not Hatsume Miku, pretty much. Hatsume, the tech girl, and that birdhead guy, and background character from what I yeah, other background characters. Deku would easily manage to avoid everybody. Eventually, he would be surrounded by the Bakugo's and Todoroki's groups. Seeing the situation was dire, in a brief moment, he would blast into the air, not being disqualified, since he had to touch the ground to be disqualified. He would be in the air, where Bakugo would shortly join him. They would try to steal each other's handbands. That's when Deku, being a savage, would tell Bakugo with his cursed speech quirk to deactivate his quirk. Bakugo, realizing this, he would blast towards his teammates in the last fleeting moments of his quirks being activated. He would manage to crash into them, but Bakugo would almost be eliminated. He would barely be able to stay on his other teammates. And that would come, oh yeah, that would be the end of the cavalry battle. We'd be moving on to the 1v1s. Deku's first opponent would be a purple-haired boy by the name of Shinzo. Deku, realizing this boy was from the support course, would think this would be an easy W. The battle would start, and instantly Shinzo would start roasting Deku and start praising him for having such an amazing quirk and as such be such amazing. Deku would almost give into this, but he thought maybe it would have to do something with his quirk. Maybe the reaction depended on it. Since Deku was being super smart, unlike on canon, however, Deku would think that maybe it would be ironic if he used Shinso's quirk on him, pulling out one of Shinso's hairs with his with his telekinesis, eating it and gaining mind control. Then he would use Aizawa's quirk to deactivate Shinso's quirk, and then he would say, I hear you got mind control. Is that true, Shinso? Shinso would be like, where did you hear that from? Instantly falling under the effects of his own quirks. Deku would tell Shinso to walk off the ring for him. Before Shinso knew it, he was standing off the ring, and the crowd was applauding for Deku. Shinso, realizing this, would be very disappointed in himself for not seeing that coming. Deku's next opponent would be Ida, but was not in there for some reason because he found out some very sad news that would be discussed later. So instead, he would be facing off against Todoroki. The battle would start. Todoroki instantly blasting off of a very powerful ice wave. Deku managing to slightly dodge it with thanks of Bakugo's quirk being in the air. He would stare dead on at Todoroki, deactivating his quirk before blasting in and throwing hands, straight hands. Managed to beat him up, yeah, severely harm Todoroki in the moments of him being quirkless. Todoroki, when he finally got his quirk restored, he would instantly shoot out some fire since, yes, he did, instinctively, since Deku was putting the mad pressure on him. Deku, seeing this, would be like, oh, you're finally deciding to use your flames, I see. Todoroki instantly deactivating his flames as he had daddy issues and he did not want to use his flames in front of his flamey dad. That's when Deku would just continue to box up Todoroki. Todoroki being so pressured that he didn't have enough time to properly form an ice attack. He would soon be eliminated as Deku would blast him away with his cursed beach quirk. Then Deku would move on to his next opponent, which would be Bakugo. Bakugo finally being able to rematch Deku would vow that this time it was going to be different, that he would be able to outpace Deku. If Deku finding this amusing again, he would decide that he was going to basically rely on his own physical capabilities, erasing Bakugo's quirk, saying that it was going to be fair now. As Bakugo would be in shock, they were both quirkless for the moment, as Deku would continuously put them hands on Bakugo. Bakugo would be very cooked. Yeah, he would demand that he needed his quirk back right now. Deku, still being a savage, would not do that. Bakugo realizing that the quirk that Deku was probably using was Aizawa's. So forcefully making him blink by making Deku flinch, he would regain his quirk and instantly blast many explosions at Deku. But Deku would continue to throw them hand, eventually deciding to use Shinso's quirk. He would provoke Bakugo, and Bakugo would easily give him an answer. And Deku, with the mind controlled Bakugo, would tell him it would be very nice if he would explode out himself outside of the arena. Bakugo would continue to blast off outside of the arena, getting the same Shinso treatment. Bakugo would be infuriated by this, and Deku would win the sports festival. Back over to the villain side, Shigaraki would be under the surgery as All for One decided that things needed to be picked up paced because because the Nomu was easily noticed by Rika. hmm So not Todoroki, bruh. So Shigaraki would get the quirk of All for One. And yeah, that would be it would continue off with the next major event as Deku would be off at the forest place, yeah, where they would be stopped, and then Aizawa would relay that they would have to get through the forest that was packed with mud creations from the pussy cats, and they would make their way through the forest. Deku just making Rika just absolutely obliterate them. Arriving in record time with the class, the Pussycats and Aizawa would be surprised, Aizawa realizing he should have probably just kept Deku out of them since he was way too overpowered for them. Eventually, dinner would arrive and they would scrunch up, but Deku would notice the little kid would not be eating his food, and Deku, being so kind-hearted, would follow the little kid out to the mountain top or something, or someplace. He would chat it up with this kid, and shortly, Muscular would arrive. That's when Deku see this would start being on the offensive, instantly pressuring Muscular with the explosion quirk. Instantly, Muscular would realize that Deku was one of the persons they were looking for. And Bakugo too. They were looking for Bakugo. Muscular would buff up himself and throw devastating attacks. Deku, realizing that this needed to end instantly, would erase his quirk, and then he would say, "You're quirkless now." Muscular would be like, "Hell I am," and then he got paralyzed by Shinso's quirk. Instantly, Deku would command Muscular that he was gonna go as far as way as possible, and Muscular would be on his way. And then Deku would, just for the extra measure, would using his courage speech, would tell him to blast away. So Muscular would be sent flying away, and then after he landed, he would go as far away as possible. That's when the forest would suddenly ignite with blue flames. As another person had arrived, this being Shigaraki. Shigaraki would quickly steal one of the pussy's cat's quirks being a search quirk, and he would look for Deku as he still had beef with him from the USJ. Deku, seeing that Shigaraki was approaching him, would be a little terrified as Deku was not really built for this. But deciding that he needed to take down the villain right here and right now, he would erase his quirks with Aizawa's quirk and proceed to lay them hands on him, using his sword to slash deeply through him. But as soon as the effects of Aizawa's quirk would end, Shigaraki would just simply regenerate. Feeling this was very cooked for Deku. He would try using Shinso's quirk on him, but the effects would not work on Shigaraki. So Deku, in the last ditch effort, would try to make a pact with Rika, something akin to a binding vow. He would offer up his life for a small so he could be able to defeat Shigaraki. Rika accepting this, but secretly not wanting Deku to perish. Rika would relentlessly beat up on Shigaraki, and then Rika would drag Shigaraki towards Deku as Rika would remember, and then for plot's sake, we will say that Deku has a domain expansion. Yes, he does, even though he doesn't have the curse technique. Let's say Rika remembering, Rika's connected to the multiverse. Rika remembers Yuta's Rika, and would use domain expansion, authentic mutual love. Deku in this domain would be able to use all the quirks for infinitely, and that would include Aizawa's. So in this domain, he would instantly erase Shigaraki's quirks in with the in and let's say Deku did not have the drawbacks of Aizawa's quirk. With the pressure higher than ever, Shigaraki would be back in the corner, but he would still have immense physical power. That's when with Deku would tell him Shigaraki to freeze. As then he would tell Rika that Rika would need to give it her all. As Rika would fire off the true love beam. This would be enough to instantly vaporize Shigaraki as he didn't have a regeneration quirk and he was stuck in place. The domain would break as Deku would accept his fate now. Rika would reveal that she never had intentions to actually take Deku's life, transforming into the little girly version of Rika, and Rika would leave behind would leave behind something akin to a Shinigami that Deku would be able to use. It wouldn't be as quite as powerful, but it would act like it would remove all the drawbacks of quirks for Deku. Yeah, let's say that. And there's the overhaul raid. And Deku would easily manage to deal with that with everybody else. And oh yeah, Stain. Let's say that before the forest arc, yeah, Deku managed to stop Ida from like getting paralyzed or dying from the hero killer. And I think that's the end of the video. If you like this, what if? Then yippee, guys, that was so amazing. Shout out Zether if you're watching this. Shout out that one weeb. And shout out Puffinsverse. They're like the goats of what ifs. So I guess this is the end of the video. Bye.